I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I clutched the edge of our kitchen counter. Tom stood across from me, his brow furrowed with concern. The weight of my secret pressed down on my chest, threatening to suffocate me. "Laura, honey, what's wrong?" Tom's voice was gentle, but I could hear the worry creeping in. "You've been acting strange all week." I looked up at him, my husband of 25 years. His salt and pepper hair and kind eyes were as familiar to me as my own reflection. We'd built a beautiful life together, full of love and laughter, but now I was about to shatter that perfect image. "Tom, I need to tell you something," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's about your mother." His eyebrows shot up. "My mother? What about her?" I swallowed hard. "I ran into her last week at the grocery store. She said some things, Tom. Terrible things." Tom's face darkened. "What kind of things?" "She told me I wasn't good enough for you," I said, the words tumbling out now. "That I've been holding you back all these years, that you would have been better off without me." Tom's jaw clenched. She had no right to say that. None at all. "There's more," I continued, my voice shaking. "She threatened to tell you about something from my past. Something I've never told you." Tom reached across the counter and took my hands in his. "Laura, whatever it is, we can face it together. You know that, right?" I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "I know, it's just, I'm scared, Tom. I'm scared of what she might do." Just then, the shrill ring of the telephone cut through the tension. We both jumped, startled by the sudden noise. Tom reached for the phone, his eyes never leaving mine. "Hello?" he answered. His face paled as he listened to the voice on the other end. "Mom, what are you?" "No, slow down. What do you mean you're coming over?" My heart raced as I watched Tom's expression change from confusion to anger. He glanced at me, mouthing, "I'm sorry," before turning his attention back to the call. "Mom, now's not a good time. We can't. Hello? Hello?" Tom stared at the receiver in disbelief. "She hung up. She's on her way over." Panic gripped me. "Tom, I can't face her. Not now. Not after what she said." He crossed the kitchen in 2 quick strides, pulling me into his arms. "It's okay, Laura. I won't let her hurt you. We'll get through this together." As we stood there, locked in an embrace, the doorbell rang. Tom and I looked at each other, fear mirrored in both our eyes. "She's here," I whispered. Tom squeezed my hand. "Remember, I'm on your side. Always." With heavy steps, we made our way to the front door. Tom's hand hesitated on the doorknob for a moment before he turned it, revealing the imposing figure of his mother, Irene. She swept into the house without waiting for an invitation, her eyes immediately locking onto me. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "If it isn't my dear daughter-in-law, we have so much to discuss, don't we?" I felt my knees go weak, but Tom's steady presence beside me gave me strength. As Irene's cold gaze bore into me, I knew our perfect life was about to be turned upside down. The battle lines were drawn, and I had no choice but to fight. Irene's presence in our home felt like a dark cloud, suffocating and inescapable. As she settled into our living room, her eyes darted around, judging every detail. "Laura, dear," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet, "I hope you don't mind me dropping by. I was in the neighborhood and thought we could have a little chat." Tom squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Mom, we were actually in the middle of something important." Irene waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, nonsense. What could be more important than family?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Actually, Irene, Tom and I were discussing some private matters." Her eyes narrowed. "Private matters? Between a husband and wife? How quaint. I'm sure whatever it is, you can discuss it with me present. After all, we're all family here." Tom stepped forward. "Mom, I think it's best if you—" "I'm making dinner," I blurted out, desperate to diffuse the tension. "Why don't you stay and eat with us, Irene?" Tom shot me a concerned look, but I nodded slightly. Better to keep her close where we could watch her, I thought. Irene's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How lovely. I do hope you've improved your cooking skills since the last time, Laura." As I busied myself in the kitchen, I could hear Irene's voice drifting in from the living room, peppered with criticisms about our decor, our lifestyle, and of course me. Tom's responses were terse, clearly trying to defend me without outright confronting his mother. When dinner was finally ready, we gathered around the table. I'd prepared a roast chicken, Tom's favorite, with all the trimmings. As I set the platter down, I silently prayed for a peaceful meal. Irene took a small bite, her face contorting into a grimace. Oh my, Laura, is this chicken supposed to be this dry? I felt my cheeks flush. I'm sorry if it's not to your liking, Irene. Not to my liking, she interrupted. My dear, it's barely edible. I don't know how Tom puts up with such subpar cooking. In my day, a wife knew how to properly care for her husband. Tom slammed his fork down. That's enough, Mom. Laura's cooking is delicious, and I won't have you insulting her in our home. Irene's eyes widened in mock innocence. Insulting? I'm merely offering constructive criticism. Laura wants to improve, don't you, dear? I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. I think I need some air, I mumbled, pushing away from the table. As I stepped onto our back porch, I heard Tom's raised voice inside, followed by the shrill tones of Irene's protests. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to steady my breathing. A few minutes later, the back door opened and Tom joined me. I'm so sorry, Laura. I asked her to leave. I turned to him, my voice barely above a whisper. She hates me, Tom. She always has, and she always will. He pulled me into a tight embrace. No, honey. She's just set in her ways. But I won't let her treat you like this anymore. I promise. Just then, Irene's voice cut through the night air. Thomas, I refuse to leave until we discuss this matter properly. Tom sighed, his body tensing. I should go deal with her. As he turned to leave, I grabbed his arm. Tom, wait, there's something else I need to tell you, something about my past that Irene threatened to reveal. His eyes searched mine, concern etched across his face. What is it, Laura? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. Before we met, I was... Thomas! Irene's voice interrupted again, closer this time. I'm waiting. Tom squeezed my hand. Hold that thought. Let me get rid of her, and then we'll talk. Whatever it is, we'll face it together. As he disappeared back into the house, I leaned against the porch railing, my mind racing. How could I tell Tom the truth about my past? And more importantly, how could we ever find peace with Irene in our lives? The sound of raised voices drifted from inside, and I knew one thing for certain. This battle with Irene was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The annual Thompson family reunion was in full swing, the backyard of Tom's childhood home bustling with relatives from near and far. I stood by the buffet table, nervously adjusting my dress and trying to blend in. Despite being married to Tom for years, I still felt like an outsider at these gatherings. Laura, darling, Irene's voice cut through the chatter. She glided towards me, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. I'm so glad you could make it. I was worried you might be too busy, or perhaps too intimidated. I forced a smile. Of course not, Irene. I wouldn't miss it for the world. She linked her arm through mine, steering me away from the crowd. Come with me, dear. I have something special to show you. Alarm bells rang in my head, but I couldn't refuse without causing a scene. Tom caught my eye from across the yard, his brow furrowed in concern. I gave him a small nod, signaling I was okay. Irene led me into the house and up to her bedroom. I wanted to show you this, she said, reaching into her closet and pulling out an ornate wooden box. It's been in the Thompson family for generations. She opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond necklace. Beautiful, isn't it? Of course, it's meant to be worn by a true Thompson woman. The implications stung, but I kept my composure. It's lovely, Irene. Here, she said, suddenly thrusting the box into my hands. Hold this while I freshen up. Before I could protest, she disappeared into the ensuite bathroom. I stood there, awkwardly clutching the box, unsure what to do. After a few minutes, I set it down on her dresser and made my way back to the party. An hour later, chaos erupted. Irene's shrill voice pierced the air. It's gone! The necklace is gone! Guests gathered around as Irene dramatically recounted how she'd shown me the necklace and left me alone with it. All eyes turned to me, suspicion and judgment clear on their faces. I didn't take it, I said, my voice shaking. I left it on the dresser and came back down. Irene's eyes narrowed. Well, then you won't mind if we check your bag, will you? My heart raced as she snatched my purse from a nearby chair. With a triumphant cry, she pulled out the diamond necklace. Aha! I knew it. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Tom pushed his way to my side, his face a mask of confusion and hurt. Laura, he whispered, tell me you didn't. Tears welled in my eyes. I swear, Tom, I didn't take it. I don't know how it got there. As Irene gloated and the family whispered, a sudden realization hit me. With trembling hands, I reached for Irene's designer handbag sitting innocently on a nearby table. "What do you think you're doing?" Irene snapped. I upended her bag, and out tumbled her wallet, keys, and the wooden box that had held the necklace. Silence fell over the gathering. Tom's cousin Sarah spoke up. "But Irene, if the box is in your bag, how did the necklace end up in Laura's?" Irene's face paled. I don't know. This is absurd." Tom's eyes met mine, understanding dawning. "Mom," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "did you plant that necklace in Laura's bag?" Irene sputtered, her carefully constructed trap crumbling around her. "Of course not. I would never. This is all a misunderstanding." But the damage was done. Family members began to mutter, casting suspicious glances at Irene instead of me. Tom wrapped a protective arm around my shoulders. "I think it's time we left," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And Mom, we'll be discussing this later." As we walked away, leaving a flustered Irene in our wake, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time, the family had seen through Irene's manipulations. Tom squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry, Laura. I should have believed you immediately." I leaned into him, relief washing over me. "It's okay. We're in this together, remember?" As we drove home, I realized the battle was far from over. Irene wouldn't take this humiliation lightly. But for now, I had won a small victory, and with Tom by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The incessant ringing of the phone jolted me awake. I groaned, glancing at the clock, 3:17 a.m. There was only one person who would call at this ungodly hour. "Irene," I muttered, reaching for the receiver. "Laura, thank goodness you're awake." Irene's voice crackled through the line, feigning concern. "I had the most terrible dream about Tom. I simply had to call and make sure he was all right." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "Tom's fine, Irene. He's sleeping, like most people at this hour." "Well, wake him up. A mother needs to hear her son's voice." "Irene, it's the middle of the night. I'm not waking Tom. Good night." I hung up, my hands shaking with frustration. This had become our new normal since the family reunion fiasco. Irene, unable to openly accuse me anymore, had resorted to more insidious tactics: constant phone calls, day and night, unannounced visits, chance encounters at the grocery store, the bank, even outside my workplace. Tom stirred beside me. "Was that my mother again?" I nodded, sinking back into the pillows. "I'm sorry, I tried not to wake you." He pulled me close, his voice heavy with sleep and worry. "This can't go on, Laura. We need to do something." The next morning, as I was rushing to leave for work, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Irene standing there, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. "Laura, darling, I was just in the neighborhood and thought I'd pop by for a quick chat." I glanced at my watch, anxiety rising. "Irene, I'm late for work. I really can't." She pushed past me into the house. "Oh, nonsense. Your job can wait. Family is more important, isn't it?" For the next hour, I sat trapped in my own living room, listening to Irene prattle on about her latest social engagements and not-so-subtle digs at my housekeeping. By the time I finally managed to usher her out, I was over an hour late for work. That evening, Tom and I sat at the kitchen table, both exhausted and on edge. "She showed up at my office today," Tom said, his voice tight with anger. "Walked right past security, saying she had an urgent family matter to discuss. It was beyond embarrassing." I reached for his hand. "Tom, we can't live like this anymore. Your mother she's destroying our lives." He nodded, a pained expression on his face. "I know. I've been thinking, maybe we should spend this weekend at your parents' place. Get away for a bit, clear our heads." Relief washed over me. "That sounds perfect. We can leave Friday after work." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. A weekend away from Irene's constant presence might be just what we needed to regroup and figure out our next move. Friday afternoon arrived, and we were packing the car when my cell phone rang. It was my mother. "Laura, honey," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I just wanted to let you know. Irene called us." My blood ran cold. "What? What did she say?" "She told us she was worried about you and Tom, said you've been acting strangely. She asked if she could come stay with us this weekend, too, to keep an eye on things." I nearly dropped the phone. "Mom, please tell me you didn't agree." The silence on the other end was deafening. "I'm sorry, sweetie. She was so insistent, and she is Tom's mother after all. We didn't know how to say no." As I hung up, I felt the walls closing in. Our one refuge, Our safe haven had been invaded. Tom found me slumped against the car, tears streaming down my face. "Laura, what's wrong? What happened?" I looked up at him, my voice barely a whisper. "She's done it again, Tom. Your mother, she's going to be at my parents' house this weekend." Tom's face hardened, a resolve I'd never seen before settling over his features. "That's it. This ends now. We're not running anymore, Laura. It's time we faced my mother head-on and put a stop to this once and for all." As we stood there, the weight of his words sinking in, I realized we were at a crossroads. Whatever we decided to do next would change everything. The question was, were we ready for the battle that lay ahead? The moment we arrived at my parents' house, I knew something was terribly wrong. Irene's car was parked in the driveway, and the tension in the air was palpable. Tom squeezed my hand reassuringly as we walked up to the front door. My mother greeted us with a strained smile. "Laura, Tom, come in. We're all in the living room." As we entered, I saw Irene perched on the edge of the sofa, her eyes red-rimmed but gleaming with an unsettling intensity. My father sat in his armchair, looking uncomfortable and out of place in his own home. "Oh, Thomas," Irene cried, leaping up to embrace Tom. "Thank goodness you're here. We have dreadful news." Tom stiffened. "What's going on, Mom?" Irene's voice dropped to a theatrical whisper. "It's your father. Henry, he's gone." The room spun around me. Tom's father, Henry, had always been a kind, gentle presence in our lives, a buffer between us and Irene's machinations. And now... "What happened?" Tom asked, his voice barely audible. "A heart attack," Irene said, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "So sudden, so tragic, and now I'm all alone in this cruel world." I watched as Tom struggled to process the news, his grief palpable. But even in this moment of shock, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Irene's behavior. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements and family gatherings. Irene insisted on staying with us, claiming she couldn't bear to be alone in her house. Every night I'd lie awake, listening to her sobs echoing through the walls, feeling a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. It was during the reading of Henry's will that things took an unexpected turn. The family lawyer cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm afraid there's been some complications with the estate." Irene's head snapped up. "What do you mean, complications?" "It appears that a significant portion of Mr. Thompson's assets were, well, they were liquidated in the months leading up to his passing. The accounts are nearly empty." The room erupted into chaos. Irene wailed dramatically, while other family members whispered furiously among themselves. Tom sat in stunned silence, his face ashen. As we drove home that evening, Tom finally spoke. "I can't believe Dad would do this. It doesn't make sense." I hesitated, then voiced the suspicion that had been growing in my mind. "Tom, what if it wasn't your father who emptied those accounts?" He looked at me sharply. "What are you saying, Laura?" "I'm saying that your mother's grief seems performative. And have you noticed how she's been throwing money around since Henry died? The new car? The expensive clothes?" Tom's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "You think my mother stole from my father before he died?" "I think it's a possibility we can't ignore," I said softly. When we got home, Irene was waiting for us, her face a mask of despair. "Oh, Thomas," she cried, "I don't know what I'm going to do. With your father gone and the estate in shambles, I'm destitute." I watched as Tom's face softened with sympathy, and my heart sank. Despite everything, he still couldn't see through his mother's manipulations. Irene continued, her voice trembling. "I hate to ask this of you, but you're all I have left. Could you and Laura, perhaps, help me out, just until I get back on my feet?" Tom looked at me, his eyes pleading. I felt a surge of anger and frustration. This was Irene's endgame, to worm her way into our lives permanently, to bleed us dry emotionally and financially. In that moment, I knew I had a choice to make. I could go along with Tom's desire to help his mother, potentially destroying our marriage in the process, or I could take a stand. The truth about my past that I'd been hiding, the secret that Irene had threatened to reveal, suddenly, it didn't seem so important anymore. Taking a deep breath, I turned to face Irene. "Actually," I said, my voice steady, "we need to talk, all of us. And this time, I'm not holding anything back." The tension in the room was suffocating as I faced Irene, Tom standing uncertainly between us. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the confrontation I'd been avoiding for years. Irene, I began, my voice surprisingly steady, I know about the money. I know you've been spending recklessly, and now you're in debt. Irene's face contorted with rage. How dare you? You know nothing about my finances. I know more than you think, I countered. I've seen the credit card bills, the loan notices. You've blown through Henry's entire estate in a matter of months. Tom's eyes widened in disbelief. Mom, is this true? Irene's demeanor suddenly shifted, tears welling up in her eyes. Oh, Thomas, she wailed. I didn't know what else to do. I was so lonely, so lost without your father. I just wanted to feel alive again. I watched as Tom's resolve wavered, his instinct to comfort his mother battling with the shock of her deception. I knew I had to act fast. Tom, I said gently, remember what we discussed in the car about the timing of the accounts being emptied? Realization dawned on his face. Mom, he said slowly, did you start spending Dad's money before he died? Irene's sobs abruptly ceased, her eyes darting between us like a cornered animal. That's preposterous. I would never. We can easily check the bank records, I interrupted. The truth will come out, Irene. For a moment, silence reigned. Then Irene's face hardened, all pretense of grief vanishing. Fine, she spat. So what if I did? Henry was dying anyway. Why should all that money go to waste? Tom stumbled back as if he'd been struck. I can't believe this, he whispered. Irene turned to him, her voice suddenly honey-sweet. Darling, you understand, don't you? Your poor mother facing a future all alone. I need your help, Thomas, just a small loan to tide me over. I watched in horror as Tom's expression softened. Mom, No, I said firmly, stepping between them. We're not giving you a cent, Irene. This ends now. Irene's eyes flashed dangerously. Oh, Laura, she hissed, you think you've won, don't you? But you forget, I know your secret, the one you've been too afraid to tell Thomas all these years. My heart raced, but I stood my ground. Go ahead, tell him. I'm not afraid anymore. Tom, Irene said, her voice dripping with venom, did you know your precious wife was once arrested for embezzlement? She's nothing but a common thief. The room fell silent. I closed my eyes, waiting for the fallout, but then I felt Tom's hand slip into mine. I know, he said quietly. My eyes flew open. You know? Tom nodded, squeezing my hand. Laura told me everything last week. We have no secrets between us, Mom. Unlike you. Irene's face drained of color. But she's a criminal. How can you stand by her? Because she made a mistake, owned up to it, and became a better person, Tom replied. She's not perfect, but she's honest, and that's more than I can say for you right now. Irene's composure crumbled entirely. You ungrateful brats, she shrieked. After everything I've done for you, I'll sue you both. I'll tell everyone about Laura's past. Go ahead, I said calmly. We're not afraid of the truth anymore. As Irene continued to rant and rave, Tom turned to me. I think it's time we asked her to leave, he said softly. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. But as Tom moved to escort his mother out, Irene suddenly clutched her chest, gasping for air. Mom? Tom cried, rushing to her side. My heart. Irene wheezed, collapsing to the floor. As Tom called for an ambulance, I stood frozen, torn between suspicion of another manipulation and genuine concern. Was this Irene's final desperate play for sympathy, or had our confrontation pushed her too far? As sirens wailed in the distance, I realized that no matter what happened next, our lives would never be the same. The hospital waiting room was a blur of activity, but I felt frozen in place. Tom paced back and forth, his face etched with worry. I couldn't shake the feeling that even now, collapsed and hooked up to machines, Irene was manipulating us. Hours ticked by before a doctor finally approached. Mrs. Thompson is stable, he said. She suffered a mild heart attack, likely brought on by stress. She'll need to stay for observation, but she should make a full recovery. Tom sagged with relief, but I felt a knot forming in my stomach. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As we entered Irene's room, her eyes fluttered open. Thomas, she whispered weakly, reaching for his hand. My darling boy. I hung back, watching as Tom's resolve crumbled in the face of his mother's frailty. She looked so small and vulnerable in the hospital bed, nothing like the scheming woman who had tormented us for years. Mom, Tom said softly, I'm glad you're okay, but we need to talk about what happened. Irene's eyes welled with tears. Oh, Thomas, I've been so foolish. Can you ever forgive me? I promise I'll change. I'll get help for my spending. I'll be better. I saw Tom wavering, his kind heart battling against years of manipulation. I knew I had to act. Irene, I said, stepping forward, we're glad you're recovering, but this doesn't change anything. Your actions have consequences. Her eyes narrowed, the mask of frailty slipping for a moment. Laura, dear, surely you of all people understand the need for second chances? I felt Tom tense beside me, but I stood my ground. I do, but I also understand the difference between genuine remorse and manipulation. This ends now, Irene. We're done. Tom nodded slowly. She's right, Mom. We can't keep doing this. It's not healthy for any of us. Irene's face contorted with rage. You ungrateful children. After everything I've done for you, I'll tell everyone about Laura's past. I'll ruin you both. No, you won't, Tom said firmly, because if you do, we'll tell everyone about your financial misdeeds. It's over, Mom. We're cutting ties. As we turned to leave, Irene's voice rose to a shriek. You can't leave me. I'm your mother. I'm all alone. In the hallway, Tom leaned against the wall, his body shaking. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling his tears soak into my shoulder. We did the right thing, I whispered. It's going to be okay. That night, as we lay in bed, both too wired to sleep, Tom turned to me. We can't stay here, he said. As long as we're in this town, she'll find a way to get to us. I nodded, an idea forming. What if we left? Started fresh somewhere new? Tom's eyes lit up. You mean it? You'd be willing to move? I'd go anywhere with you, I said, squeezing his hand. We could find a quiet town far from here, build a new life, just the two of us. As we began to plan our escape, a sense of excitement replaced the dread that had weighed us down for so long. We stayed up all night, researching towns, looking at houses, dreaming of a future free from Irene's shadow. The next morning, exhausted but determined, we set our plan in motion. We called a realtor, put our house on the market, started packing our essentials. We told no one of our plans, not even my parents. The less people who knew, the less chance Irene had of finding out. Just as we were finalizing the details of our move, my phone rang. It was Irene's number. My hand shook as I answered. Laura? Irene's voice was sickeningly sweet. I think it's time we had a little chat, don't you? Just the two of us. No Tom, no hospitals, no distractions. What do you say? I looked at Tom, who was watching me with concern. In that moment, I knew we had one last battle to face before we could truly be free. All right, Irene, I said, my voice steady. Let's end this once and for all. The quaint little town of Millbrook welcomed us with open arms. As Tom and I unloaded the last of our boxes into our new home, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We were finally free. Can you believe it? Tom said, wrapping his arms around me. A fresh start, just like we planned. I leaned into his embrace, savoring the moment. It feels almost too good to be true. We spent the next few weeks settling in, exploring our new neighborhood, and making friends. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. No more looking over my shoulder, no more dreading the ring of the phone. But as autumn turned to winter, a familiar unease began to creep in. What if Irene found us? What if she showed up on our doorstep, ready to shatter our newfound tranquility? One crisp December morning, as I was preparing breakfast, a wave of nausea hit me. I barely made it to the bathroom before emptying the contents of my stomach. Tom found me there, pale and shaky. Laura, are you okay? He asked, concern etched on his face. I nodded weakly. I think I might be pregnant. Tom's eyes widened, a mix of joy and fear crossing his face. Are you sure? A quick trip to the pharmacy and an anxious wait later, we had our answer. 2 pink lines. We were going to be parents. As the initial shock wore off, excitement took over. We began planning for the nursery, discussing names, dreaming of our future as a family. But with each passing day, a nagging worry grew in the back of my mind. Tom, I said one evening as we sat by the fireplace, what if Irene finds out about the baby? What if she tries to worm her way back into our lives? Tom's jaw clenched. We won't let her. This is our family, our future. She has no place in it. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart nearly stopped as I read the message. Congratulations on the little one. I always knew I'd be a grandmother someday. See you soon, Irene. I showed Tom the message, watching as anger and fear battled across his face. How did she find out? He whispered. It doesn't matter, I said, surprising myself with my calm. What matters is what we do now. We spent the night discussing our options, weighing the pros and cons of each. By morning, we had made our decision. I picked up my phone and dialed Irene's number. She answered on the first ring. Well, well, she purred. I was wondering when you'd call. Listen carefully, Irene, I said, my voice steady. Yes, I'm pregnant. Yes, you're going to be a grandmother. But you will never, ever be a part of this child's life, not unless you make some serious changes. How dare you, she began, but I cut her off. No, how dare you? You've manipulated and hurt us for years, Herb. If you want any chance at being in this child's life, you need to get help. Real help. Therapy, financial counseling, the works. And even then, it'll be on our terms. There was a long silence on the other end. When Irene finally spoke, her voice was small, almost childlike. And if I do all that, you'll let me see the baby? We'll consider it, I said firmly. But understand this, one step out of line, one attempt at manipulation, and you're out. For good. This is your last chance. Irene, take it or leave it. Another pause. I understand. I'll do it, for the baby. As I hung up, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. For the first time, I had faced Irene on my own terms, without fear or hesitation. Tom pulled me into a tight embrace. I'm so proud of you, he whispered. 6 months later, as I held our newborn daughter in my arms, I marveled at how much had changed. Irene had kept her word, attending therapy and making real progress. While our relationship was still fragile, there was hope for a better future. As I looked down at my daughter's tiny face, I made a silent promise. No matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, as a family. The cycle of manipulation and fear ended with us. Our daughter would know only love, strength, and honesty. And in that moment, surrounded by the warmth of my little family, I knew that we had truly won. Not just against Irene, but against the fear and doubt that had held us back for so long. We were free, we were happy, and we were ready for whatever life had in store for us next.